Hey folks, it's Sam Whitfield here. Have you ever thought about starting a podcast? Well, I'm here to tell you about my friends at Anchor. And if you're a long-time listener of the program, you've heard me talk about them before. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, they're 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. This means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. Anchor is, in fact, ridiculously easy to use, ladies and gentlemen, and it is one of the primary reasons why I host the Whitfield Report with Anchor. They take care of everything from distribution to advertising, and all I have to do is continue providing great content for you folks, which makes my job a whole lot easier, and it makes listening to this podcast a whole lot easier for you guys. So it's a win-win all around. Get started today for free by going to anchor.fm/start. And I can't wait to hear your podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Whitfield Report Thursday edition. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, recording here for for Thursday's edition of the podcast. Sorry, I'm doing it so late in the evening, but just figured I would post an episode for you guys before the end of the day. So, hope you guys are doing well. This is an audio-only edition of the podcast, and I haven't done an audio-only version in a while. I've been trying to live stream lately more and more to get the live audience interaction, but considering that YouTube seems to either censor my streams from the view feed or just glitch out entirely. I didn't really feel like dealing with that sort of thing, so I just figured to podcast the old-fashioned way, which is simply to pull up GarageBand here and configure the mic settings and whatnot, and do an episode for you guys the old-fashioned way. And I know people who still podcast the old-fashioned way, but what can I say? I still enjoy just ranting into the microphone for you guys every once in a while. And real quick, before we begin the show, I would like to give a big shout-out to my mother, whose birthday it is today. So, very happy birthday to you, Mom. And, my mother is great. I happen to think she's the best mother in the world. Of course, I'm a little biased since she is my mother after all. But, she's a wonderful woman, and I'm very glad to have her in my life. And she's always been supportive of me in everything that I do, whether it be, school or, Boy Scouts. Even this podcast, she's been very supportive of. Even in the early days when I don't think she quite understood what I was doing with the podcast, she was still supportive of me doing this podcast. Provided I, wasn't making calls for violence or anything like that, which, I never have. But anyway, that leads us into a kind of a segue for tonight. And I'll probably cover this a little bit more on Saturday night's live show. But I do want to cover this a little bit here tonight. Apparently Twitter has decided to take action against the Qanon movement, and on Tuesday, I believe it was, Twitter Trust and Safety took the quote-unquote bold and unprecedented action of stating that they were going to ban QAnon-related Twitter accounts, which, according to them, have been supposedly causing a danger to the online Twitter community and whatnot. Now, to be fair, folks, I don't really understand what QAnon is, first and foremost. I wouldn't say I'm a fan of theirs, but neither do I directly oppose QAnon per se. Like I said, I mainly don't understand what QAnon is. They've kind of been online for a while now, and I guess the best way I can kind of explain it for those who don't really know what I'm talking about, I guess QAnon popped up in early 2017, right after Donald Trump was sworn in under the presidency, and from what I understand, QAnon is supposedly tied in to helping expose the deep state plot to remove Trump from office and or assassinate him, which, let me be clear, folks, I do believe, as I've mentioned, that there is a far left conspiracy and a deep state plot to sabotage and or remove Donald Trump from office. I fully believe that that has happened. That's what Russiagate was all about. Basically trying to say that Donald Trump tampered with the election. Democrats and liberals, both in politics and in the media, were trying to make Russiagate a whole big deal. And, there was Comey, there was, Comey, there was, Adam Schiff, there was, of course, Mueller. I almost blanked on Mueller's name there, but, there was that whole crowd of people who were trying to say that Trump, stole the election. And, obviously the Clintons were in on this. Turned out Russiagate was a whole big, nothing burger. And Mueller finally had to admit at the beginning of, really at the beginning of this year, that there was no Russian collusion, and he had to admit that, Russiagate was a nothing burger, essentially. Now, during that time, I was saying that the whole Russiagate narrative that the left-wing media and, the politicians had spun was, in fact, part of the deep state. So there is no question in my mind that there is a, plot from the left and the media to discredit and destroy Donald Trump's presidency. Okay? With that being said, QAnon is a bit of an enigma to to me, at the very least, and to many of my listeners, I suspect. No one really knows what QAnon is, whether it's an actual movement of people or whether it's just an internet meme. But there are a lot of people who post QAnon quote-unquote intel relating to the deep state, and also As of late, they've really been focusing on this whole Jeffrey Epstein and, Gladstein Maxwell type thing, which is what and pedophile, island and the Lolita Express. And I will say this, that some of the people who post QAnon-related things have good information some of the time, but by and large, QAnon seems to be completely conspiratorial. So like I said, I don't really know what QAnon is. I don't really have a whole good understanding of what they are, but they generally seem to be conspiracy-oriented and kind of an internet enigma. So let me just leave it at that. With that being said, I've never seen a QAnon account, call for violent action against, Adam Schiff or, Comey or Mueller or, any of these, quote-unquote, Democrats or, even like left-wing politicians or any of these quote-unquote deep state operatives. I've never seen a QAnon account call for violence. They may post like weird hashtags like trust the plan and whatnot, but that's about it as far as I can tell. Now, why do I bring this up in particular? Well, it is because Twitter, Trust and Safety, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, has decided to start banning QAnon accounts for supposedly provoking violence and also for supposedly hacking the Twitter accounts of high-profile users, quote-unquote, which leads me to believe, right, who are these quote-unquote high-profile users that have gotten hacked? And what exactly is the evidence that QAnon is responsible, right? Twitter Trust and Safety did a whole large tweet thread about this. And, by the time many of you guys hear this podcast, either on Thursday night, if it's on Thursday night, you probably won't see this, but if you guys are listening to this episode on Friday, I will have most likely posted kind of my article summarizing Twitter's, action, quote-unquote, against QAnon-based Twitter accounts. Right? So, Twitter is supposedly blaming these QAnon accounts for hacking high-profile, Twitter users, which again, at this point, we don't even know what really a high-profile Twitter user could be considered as now, because basically, it's relatively easy if you're on the left to get a check mark on Twitter, right? The check mark, little verification logo doesn't mean much anymore. There are people verified on Twitter with less of an influence than I have, right? And I'm not even that big of a voice on Twitter. I'm small potato, compared to some of these other, conservative voices on Twitter, right? And even like the big, conservative voices who are on Twitter, some of them don't even have verified check marks anymore, right? So, like I said, who are these high-profile users that QAnon is quote-unquote hacking, right? That's the first big question. Second question here, though. what evidence does Twitter have that these are QAnon-related accounts specifically? Because so far they haven't given us any evidence that these are QAnon-related accounts specifically. And then what are the threats that these QAnon accounts are making? If it's just to expose information, well then Anonymous has been doing that for years and years and years, and Twitter doesn't seem to make a big deal about, Anonymous, right? And also, regarding threats on Twitter, it is very, odd, quote unquote, and also very convenient that Twitter is going after QAnon-related accounts, which are seemingly pro-Trump, right? And yet they continue to ignore tweets from Antifa and Black Lives Matter-related users who are actively calling for violence against conservatives and eventually making threats against, voices like Tucker Carlson, saying that Rush Limbaugh should, die of cancer pretty quickly, saying that Milo Yiannopoulos deserves to get, gang raped because he's a faggot, and even like smaller voices like myself have sometimes been harassed by Antifa, people on Twitter. Yet when we report the accounts, almost nothing happens to, these Antifa people. It's just freedom of speech, right? And there's no, very few of these Antifa accounts ever get shut down on Twitter. Yet, QAnon posts conspiracy-related, stuff, which may or may not, relate to anything. And, oh my God, QAnon is too dangerous and they need to be shut down. And they need to be banned off Twitter completely. Right? This is the mentality of Twitter Trust and Safety and Jack Dorsey, that they're going to take care of, QAnon, despite the fact that they have made no violent threats whatsoever here. Now, like I said, to be honest, folks, I don't really understand what QAnon is all about. I'm sure that upon releasing this podcast, I'm going to get a whole bunch of, QAnon-related, people, messaging me on Parler and maybe Twitter, and, I'll probably get like a whole bunch of emails from QAnon-related users, in my inbox for the show, and in my email and whatnot. But, to be quite honest, like I said, I don't understand what QAnon is. With that being said, they don't seem to be, violent or anything. So, the fact that they're being censored actively by Twitter, to me, is frightening and proves once again that Twitter is actively censoring conservative voices, right? Antifa goes and threatens conservative voices and libertarian voices, and nothing is done to them. And yet, QAnon posts, conspiracy theories, which may or may not be true, may or may not be false, and yet they're a danger to the platform and they have to go. So there is obviously a double standard, and people love to go on this whole thing of, well, Twitter is on a slippery slope when it comes to censorship. And, as I've titled my blog post article that I'm currently writing on this very topic, no, Twitter's no longer on a slippery slope. They've gone over the slope and are quickly falling off a cliff. They're no longer on the censorship slippery slope. They've gone, full-on partisan censorship. Right? And this is something we saw a few years ago, too, with, Alex Jones. Right? Again, Alex Jones may or may not say some crazy shit sometimes, but it was mind-blowing to me, and I think mind-blowing to a lot of people, and anyone who is pro-free speech, that Twitter and other social media platforms actively took measures to silence him on every single mainstream media platform, right? And we're seeing this again with Qanon, but it's on a much greater scale. Because this relates to anyone who has ever posted QAnon-related content, right? Which begs the question, is this now going to extend to people who may follow QAnon-related accounts, right? Because I can tell you that there are definitely a few accounts that I follow on Twitter that do post QAnon info. I don't really pay attention to them all that actively, but, they follow the show and they interact, with me in the live streams, often, so I'll follow them back, and like I said, I don't read too much into the whole QAnon conspiracy things. I don't know how accurate they are. But just because I am, somehow connected to a few of these people on Twitter or other social media platforms, this may now set precedent for, people who are just tangentially related to QAnon accounts to getting banned if they're, conservative and or libertarian. I mean, heck, now if you Google QAnon accounts out of curiosity or anything, you may too get banned. We have no idea how far this, censorship goes, and it is a very dangerous, line that Twitter is now taking to actively censor, a group of people just because they may be posting conspiracies. Like I said, if Twitter can give active examples of QAnon accounts actually making, valid threats to people, then that's one thing. Threatening people is obviously not protected under free speech. But, even if it was hate speech that they were saying, that is protected under the Constitution. And yeah, folks, I understand that Twitter is a private company, that they don't abide by, that they don't have to legally abide by free speech rules. But as I have said before, of all these various, social media platforms, it's probably a good idea that they do abide by these free speech rules. At least that's how they should act. Because, like or not, social media is the Times Square, is basically the public square for people now. It's how we express our ideas now is online mainly, right? Especially right now in 2020 when there's, COVID going on and people aren't really allowed to gather out in public, right? We are now online more than ever. By necessity, folks, whether you like or not. And it's going to be that way for the foreseeable future. So, like I said, the fact that Twitter is actively censoring QAnon accounts for no apparent reason other than that they find their speech questionable is frightening to me, folks. And it should be frightening to you, too. And, you know, obviously you can make the argument, well, it's a free, Twitter is a private company. They have the right to do what they want, right? That is a common refrain among a lot of my libertarian friends, one that I used to, stand by more, stand by a lot. But given what, is going on in 2020, and really for the last 5 to 10 years, with Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Spotify and iTunes, pretty much owning all of the monopolies for social media and basically created, user-created independent content. Considering that big tech basically has a monopoly on speech production and, independent media, these hosting platforms, I'm a little weary of, of big tech, having such a big monopoly. And yeah, I know people say, well, if you don't like it, start your own platform, start your own solution. But again, a lot of these companies have monopolies. It is impossible for smaller companies to really get a foothold. Parler, I will say this, Parler, which is kind of a Twitter alternative, has probably had the best, opportunity of, kind of breaking the mold and having a, true fighting chance against, Twitter. But they're just one, company, and they haven't been around for very long. I think they've only been around for 2 years, maybe not even. And I can tell you that, their operating costs are probably pretty expensive, and their revenue stream I don't think is anywhere near towards Twitter's. In fact, I know it's not anywhere near Twitter, so they're going to have a tough time, competing, against Twitter. And, although they run a tight ship, and, it is a free speech platform, but they do have rules to try and keep the riffraff out, which I appreciate. Even so, The Verge, for one, and probably BuzzFeed, a lot of the mainstream, tech journals have tried to, call Parler another alt-right safe haven, just like they have Gab, right? And this is a, continued problem, right? Because smaller independent, social media platforms that do allow, kind of conservative and right-leaning voices are constantly attacked by, big tech media and, slandered as being alt-right somehow. And I'm not complaining, but it's just a fact of life. So, conservative tech leaders are constantly, under attack, right? And it's just something that they have to deal with. Meanwhile, Twitter is, basically in control of one of the most influential spheres, of communication, which is Twitter. Twitter is now, even Jack Dorsey admits that Twitter influences election now. And so that is, to some people that is very scary on both the left and the right. Now it's funny because, the left loves to claim that, Trump used Twitter to win the election and to influence people over to his side. And that may be true, right? But the Dems are using the same exact thing. So I'm not necessarily calling for the government to regulate Twitter, fully as a platform to, the full extent of their length. But basically, as I have said before, Twitter and other social media platforms need to be regulated in the sense that they have to decide whether or not they either want to be considered, publishers of content and be able to, choose who can and cannot speak, or they should be required to, determine if they're going to be, platforms as opposed to publishers. Well, then, that will protect them from any, wrongdoing, but that means that they should also have everyone allowed on the platform, regardless of, ideology. And, it should be a free-for-all, basically. And, yeah, that may mean that you get hate speech. But by and large, the neo-Nazis and, the KKK and, all of these various hate groups that the left, proclaims that the right wing is made up of, and that somehow, also libertarians are hateful too. Whenever these, hate groups, and they are legitimate hate groups, get confronted by, average, ordinary conservatives and libertarians and really, liberty-loving people, right? We condemn hate speech. We condemn hatred, conservatives do, and libertarians do. So when actual, Nazis like Richard Spencer say, weird stuff and hateful comments, we tend to speak out against them pretty strongly. Conservatives do a pretty good job, I would say, and, as do libertarians, of keeping an eye on our own ranks and making sure that the riffraff, stays out for all intents and purposes. Yeah, you may get a Richard Spencer or a Nick Fuentes, or an Owen Benjamin in the mix, like every once in a while, who is, out there on the fringe. But, by and large, conservatives tend to say that, we don't agree and we don't condone, these, opinions, and, we're proud to be Americans. We want all people to, succeed in America. We want everyone to do well. Liberty should be for everyone in this country. That is what mostly all conservatives believe, and mostly all libertarians believe. And the fringe doesn't get a lot of attention from us, by and large. And yet, Jack Dorsey and the Twitter team are obsessed with painting us all as radicals. It is really bizarre and quite honestly, sad to see. We're used to it by now, but still that doesn't make it any easier that this is the case. Right? And furthermore, I would argue that, having these discussions, on, Twitter, right? Like if Twitter weren't as invasive, right, in censoring people's voices, if we could actually have a dialogue, with some of these more radical voices, we may, okay, like for example, there was a story of about 10 years ago, so probably back in like 2007 or 2008, there's actually a story, and I think was actually Joe Rogan who brought this up. There used to be a woman, I can't remember this lady's name off the top of my head, but long story short, she was a Westboro Baptist Church activist, right? She was raised in the Westboro Baptist Church, and she was also, she was raised in the Westboro Baptist Church. She embraced their doctrine fully since she was raised in the church, and practiced it for the vast majority of her adult life. And then she got a Twitter account and started, spreading her message of hate on the platform. And there were gay people and black people who, tweeted her back and, challenged her rhetoric, challenged her hateful ideas, right? And actually started a dialogue with her about these various, things regarding, God hates fags and, other statements she had made. Right? So her doctrine was challenged, and she was presented with another, viewpoint, another side. And over time, through these Twitter conversations, she ended up, I think within like a year or two, basically being de-radicalized, and then ended up renouncing the Westboro Baptist Church, and now actively seeks to de-radicalize others from the Westboro Baptist Church. And I'm sorry, folks, I wish I could remember, her name and the specific story of this. Like I said, I'm just kind of doing tonight's podcast, riffing here on the fly. But, this is an example, a prime example of a hateful person being de-radicalized. And it just goes to show that when people are allowed to have a dialogue and truly communicate with each other, yeah, some nasty and mean things might get said at first. And yeah, being bullied online sucks. And, it's not for everyone. If you're being harassed, actively block people. If you're being threatened, by all means, report them for that stuff. I'm I'm not saying, folks, to be clear, I'm not saying that, like, active death threats and whatnot should be allowed. But disagreeing with someone of different ideological persuasions should be allowed. And because of that, discussion, and various different types of ideologies should be allowed on Twitter, even if we do find them repugnant, and on other social media platforms. Having dialogues is how we build common ground with each other, even if we disagree at first. So you might not understand what QAnon is. I might not understand what QAnon is. Like I said, they don't seem radical, in terms of, like, threatening people. But rather than silence them, they should be allowed to speak. And this is, once again, a dangerous, precedent that is being set. And like I pointed out a few years ago, I don't like the fact that, that Alex Jones always spreads conspiracies, but I don't think he is the worst, guy out there either. I think by and large, Alex, says some crazy stuff, but sometimes he is right on money about some things. Regardless of that, I think he should still be on iTunes and on YouTube and all these various platforms that he's been kicked out of. Because the only antidote to hate speech, right, is more free speech. And, spreading the message of liberty and freedom, that's how we promote liberty and conservative and libertarian values. That's how we promote American greatness. And the fact that, although the government might be flawed, America in and of itself is a great country and a great nation. So, the QAnon, thing, folks, with people being censored, that really does bother me, and it's unfortunate that it's happening. And this continues to be, a problem with Twitter and them censoring conservative voices while simultaneously leaving, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, who have made active threats against people, alone. And we will cover this more on Thursday. But in the meantime, I just wanted to, share this with you guys and, give some of my initial thoughts to this whole story on Thursday. And I'll cover it more on Saturday's live stream show, and maybe getting a couple guests on to talk about this issue. And then, as always, I will be on Versa Media's show starting at around 11 p.m. on Saturday night to talk about this as well. So, folks, that's all I have for you today. But thanks for listening to this, podcast, wherever you are in the past, present, future hour. And as always, you can follow me on Twitter at SamDeber_NDC, on Instagram at SamDeber_NDC. Don't forget to follow me on Parler and Gab at Sam Whitfield, Facebook.com/The Whitfield Report. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for the live stream, YouTube.com/The Whitfield Report, DLiveTV.com/The Whitfield Report for the DLive channel. If you're on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, please give this a 5-star rating and review. If you're on Spotify, please share this with your, friends and family. TheSamWhitfield.com for all your, needs. Like I said, I will have a blog post up on Friday, for you guys to read some of my thoughts on this subject. And I have recently redone the website a little bit and cleaned that up. So the Whitfield Report actually has a dedicated page on the website now. So feel free to go and check that out. Again, thesamwhitfield.com is my website address, and that's also where you can, get a hold of me directly if you need to. And folks, without further ado, that'll be the show for tonight, Thursday night. Like I said, thanks for listening. And from all of us here at NGC Studios, God bless you, God bless America, God, freedom, legacy, in that order, as my friend Mr. John Neary likes to say. And I will see you guys for the live show on Saturday night, folks, 10 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. And, we'll have a good time then. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and, God bless. And I'll see you folks later, folks. Have a good evening. Hey there, folks. If you've made it this far to the end of the podcast, I'd like to thank you very much for listening to the show. You are the ones that make it possible for me to make an income from podcasting, and I greatly appreciate that just by listening to our show. You are helping us gain ad revenue. However, if you would really like to help support the show, I encourage you to please donate to the podcast and become a supporter of the show. You can head over to anchor.fm/Whitfield Report and click the support this podcast button and choose the amount that suits you to support the show. Or you can click the link in the show notes and it will directly take you to that page. If you can support the podcast, I really, really appreciate that. Anything that you can do to help out is greatly appreciated. Even if you can't afford to help financially support the podcast, I encourage you to please go on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, and please leave this podcast a positive 5-star review. That really helps us out here at the Whitfield Report. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next episode.